What's up, everyone? It is Richie here from the F1 podcast. Happy November 11th, 2025, season 5, episode 30. I'm here with Andrew Cleary, and welcome back to the podcast. Everyone remembers Daniel Valente AKA F1 guy Dan. Dan, welcome back, man. We really appreciate you coming on.
Officially a reoccurring guest now. I'm happy to be back. Always love coming on with you guys.
Friend of the
Thank
program.
Friend of the pod, friend of the program. And especially like when we had you on last time, I forget which episode there was. We had one driver that was current the champion at that point. I think it was Oscar Piastri. And things have changed since you've last been on the week of the episode. So recording this obviously a couple days after the Brazilian Grand Prix, which Lando Norris held off an impressive run by Max Verstappen on Sunday's race. If you guys caught our previous episode, we talked about Saturday. So we'll just talk mostly about Sunday's race in Brazil. And then want to also take a moment and thank everybody who came out to Garden Bar Bodega. We're going to be back again for the Las Vegas Grand Prix. So stay tuned on an official announcement on Instagram coming up. So Daniel, I'm going to send the first question to you. Yes, dominant weekend by Lando Norris. He, took full advantage of the carnage that happened first lap. Is it safe to say that this driver championship is now over?
I mean, you never say never in Formula One, but it's certainly looking like it's trending that way. I mean, just you think about 2 weekends ago, we were talking about like Max coming back into title contention here after Austin, and it was almost like Lando was an afterthought. It was just like, can Max catch Piastri? And now we're talking about Lando could potentially clinch this championship before we even get to Abu Dhabi. So I think just based on trends, current form, certainly everything is pointing in Lando's direction, and if you look at Oscar's form too, I think it's going to take a lot for him to not only find his form but also find his footing, maybe mentally, and almost feels like he's overdriving sometimes. And then with Red Bull and Max, Max will perform if you give him the machinery. We've seen that for I don't know how many years now. It's just a matter of can Red Bull actually give him the machinery? And I think they've been very up and down this season, and counting on them to deliver for 3 straight Grand Prix weekends, which on some tracks that have some different characteristics. You think about Vegas, Qatar, and Abu Dhabi are kind of similar in ways, but I think that's going to be a mighty challenge too. So yeah, I think that's why if you were a betting man, Lando would be the safe money right now.
And Andrew, I'll turn it over to you very quickly, but just to build off some of the comments that Daniel's talking about, if we talk about that deficit that Verstappen had to the McLaren drivers, 104 points at Zandvoort that he was to Piastri, and now that he's only 25 points back, it's really been pretty. I don't know what you want to say, but just the change of dynamics between both drivers for McLarens, but also like the emergence of Max, coming from pit lane basically to P3 on Sundays. But I guess like I'll turn it over to you, Andrew. You probably have some comments and some funny moments you want to talk about this race weekend.
Well, I think over the past two races, the key word is like mistakes, and Lando has not made a single one. He's been absolutely dominant in every facet of, from qualifying to sprint qualifying to the sprint race to the Grand Prix itself. Like he has been the dominant factor, and unfortunately, Oscar has made plenty of mistakes. Right, the DNF in the sprint this weekend, going off on the track and kind of hitting a slippery spot on the curb. He went away, and then that 10-second penalty, which would arguably is harsh, but that's the rules are the rules. Unfortunately, and stewards aren't going to go away from those, and that costed him a chance to be able to fight for a win this weekend. I think like what Red Bull have done with Max and being able to close the gap on Oscar has been incredible. The problem is now it's not Oscar; it's now we have to worry about closing the gap in on Lando, who's now 51 points ahead of him with only 83 to play. And I think as Daniel alluded to, is that Red Bull, are inconsistent in terms of providing the setup that Max needs in order to be competitive every weekend. And they had to take a penalty as a result this weekend. Did not have the right setup with regard to the sprint qualifying. So they had to take a pit lane start to help, create that great setup for him to be able to finish on the podium. on Sunday. And when you give Max a task like that, he is going to perform to the max. No pun intended. But I don't think it. It was interesting to see because he did pit for softs there in the around lap 54 when he could have kept on that medium and looked at maybe a net P2 finish with having to battle Lando for P1 in that case. They kind of went the safe route. It's easy to play the what if game after the fact, but because at times we always say that, oh, what if they, should have pitted and be able to kind of use the softer tire, use the fresher tire to be able to overcome, go back into the race lead. And I think they just played it safe in that regards, knowing that what they were getting out from the pit lane start was quite impressive anyways.
It'll be interesting to kind of see. I think for me, my mindset will just be like when we hit Las Vegas is McLaren has historically have not had, good luck in that track, and maybe that is probably the most vulnerable they will probably look. And we've talked about how Ferrari has done usually well when it comes to at Las Vegas, but I think you had a quote. Let's segue to other drivers. Ferrari, another double DNF weekend, and I think it's been a consistency when both drivers going out, and there were some words from Ferrari executives. Andrew, I'll turn it over to you, but I think you wanted to share this one, but I beat you to it.
Yeah, well, John Elkann, he's wasn't afraid to shy away from the media in discussing about Ferrari's recent performance at Brazil, where he quoted, and this is translated over in his interview, that Brazil was a huge disappointment. If we look at the F1 championship, we can say on one hand that our mechanics are effectively winning the championship with the performances they are putting in, particularly with everything that they're doing in our pit stops. If we look at our engineers, there is no doubt the car has improved. If we look at the rest, it is not up to standards. We have drivers who need to focus more and talk less because we still have several important races to come and it is not impossible to achieve a second place. That is at stake, and more important than Bahrain. For context, Ferrari won the World Endurance Championship title in Bahrain. And then carrying on the quote, it says, "It is proof that when Ferrari is united as a team, we win." Just an absolute firecracker from John Elkann, in my opinion, discussing the performance of his drivers. And I think there's a little bit of merit to it, but I think there's a little bit of hypocrisy there as well.
You lose.
I think just that's just not the way you want to go about things. When you want his statement literally includes the words about unity, and he's the one kind of creating division. Now, I will say it is pretty interesting after Interlagos. The talk was Ferrari is now fourth in the constructors, and it seems pretty convenient that ever since these quotes come out, nobody has been talking about Ferrari being fourth in the constructors now. So, whether that's intentional or not, I don't know, but it does seem like it has taken some attention away from that and maybe selfishly now pushed it back on the drivers who, are, I think it is fair to say Lewis has struggled this year, and that is who I would predict or guess this is kind of more targeted towards. But at the end of the day, that car has just been a massive disappointment in every aspect when you compare how they ended 2024. So, you want to talk about unity, but this is if it's a team sport, then it's not the drivers who are only under delivering. It's the entire team. Bar the fine, we'll give it to the pit crew because they have been exceptional at pit stops this year. But other than that, I think almost everyone has to look in the mirror in a way.
They have 43 pit stops under 2.5 seconds, which is
insane.
clear ahead or 11 clear ahead of Red Bull, who has 32.
Yeah.
But in my opinion, what is frustrating is that technically the car is just kind of like a mixed grab bag for tracks. It's not like they can dominate at any particular track. It's just good everywhere. But the problem is their setup can't attribute to be able to overcome teams like Mercedes and McLaren or Red Bull who might dominate at tracks. So to say that technically they've done everything that they can and the car's improved, yeah, well, the car was terrible at the beginning of the season. I mean, when you start rock bottom, of course it's going to improve. And the problem is they haven't made a big upgrade since I want to say mid-season because they're now focusing on 2026. So there's just I don't know. Again, I agree with Daniel in the sense that it's convenient that he did say these words, and maybe he's been trying to say a little frustration, but I do think that when you haven't won a Constructors' Championship in '07 and you want to talk about unity, you have to have driver input as well. Lewis has tried so much this season to provide driver input on how to improve the car and the team. And I think just based on that, there's it's falling on deaf ears at Ferrari.
And I
And
think we touched upon this last time I came on too, just Lewis's first year at Ferrari, but it just has consistently felt like two dance partners who were not made for each other now. And, hopefully that changes next year. And I said the first time I was on that this is all about a learning experience, but it just seems like it's becoming such an awkward fit. It's just two sides that, for whatever reason, don't get each other. And, I'm sure some of it from Lewis's end is like frustration on the way, Ferrari can be a little stuck in their ways sometimes when it comes to doing things. But yeah, not great.
I think just building on some of these points, you talked about either upgrades if they try to improve on some tracks, which normally they've done well, and it's just been the complete opposite. I mean, we have no race wins this year. They have no race wins to show this year, minus the Chinese sprint race, which Lewis did win that. I think Leclerc only has 7 podiums to show. Um, it's going to get a little messy towards the end of the season if they're going to keep airing out their laundry out in public per se.
If I may, too, even Leclerc's only pole of the season in Hungary, his drivers put faster Q2 times than he set his pole time. It was just like, everything happened to go the right way. So it's not even like you could say that was on merit of like car performance. It was just the right factors, the right circumstances. Ferrari fell onto a pole because, Leclerc's brilliance and everything just seemed to add up for them. But yeah.
Looking at Mercedes, I think that would be probably the complete opposite of what's going on. Kimi Antonelli gets his second podium of the season, a miraculous drive, and towards the end, holding off Max Verstappen. For a driver in first year, I think this was really special to kind of see. And then Daniel, you and I were in Montreal to see his first podium, but I mean, talk about a great weekend for Mercedes.
Yeah, I think Kimi, this was a coming of age weekend for him. It was, maybe the first time since Montreal that we saw him put everything together. And I thought it was interesting too. I believe Toto Wolff was saying something after the race that, this is a track that Kimi's never driven at before in his F1 or junior career. And sometimes that almost helps him in a way because there's no expectations or pressure. Where if you look at the European leg where he really struggled, it might have been because he's driven here before and he's getting frustrated. Why am I behind my teammate, even though I have experience at this track? Whereas he comes into these weekends a lot, much more looser. And I think that, does help in a way for a young driver who is only 19 years old. But yeah, just incredible stuff when you consider that the only two drivers who stayed consistent all weekend were Lando Norris, who is leading the championship, and Kimi Antonelli, who again is 19 years old. So hats off to him.
And I wonder how much also it speaks to the fact that he has secured his seat for next season as well. And, he can kind of drive freely and enjoy the car and take those calculated risks when necessary to perform. And that's what, this weekend he was just Mr. Consistent, P2 in every facet of the weekend. And it was just great to see, yeah, as you mentioned, Daniel, the coming of age for him. And that only has to give Toto confidence going into next season as well.
I don't know when the last time I saw Toto smile on TV. Like I can't remember. Yeah, I don't even know if when George won his last race he was smiling. It's just that was I saw
In
that a lot on
fairness,
Reddit.
he's probably excited too that he's going to be selling a portion of his Mercedes stake that's worth
Yeah.
6 billion. So he's going to be raking in the cash very soon. So maybe that's why he was smiling as well.
I mean, you got to see Kimi, who is basically was billed as like the next Max, fighting against the Max Verstappen on track. So I can't picture a happier sight for Toto there.
It was always I was also like it kind of really wanted Max to win the race just because like we've seen him dominate at Interlagos. I think the last season I'm looking at you, Dan, Mr. Stats guy. I think he started P17.
17.
Yeah,
Yeah,
and then I don't know if he won the podium or got on the podium or won the race, but like
he
another,
won last year. Yeah.
yeah, perfect. This is why you're the stats guy. But let's talk about a little bit about that strategy about Max. Obviously he talked about on Saturday that this championship was pretty much over, given that he had to start in the pit lane. But it's another impressive drive, and the rain did not come on Sunday, which was quite surprising.
I mean, it's kind of insane that like you have a driver like Max who's starting in the pit lane, and if this was anybody else, barring maybe a handful of drivers, you'd be like, Well, this is over. Like maybe like P4, P5, a podium if he's lucky. But even with Max, there was still that slight like, could he do this? You know, and there's been a lot of talk about his last stint there where he pit for softs, and I think Andrew touched upon this. But if I feel the same, if that were me, I think Red Bull probably should have played this a little more aggressive or like defensively, I should say, and left Max out just to see what he can do. I mean, if you look at, I think at worst, he falls on P2. At best, you're forcing Lando Norris to pass you on track. And I mean, if I think Andrea Stella also said after the race that, when he saw Max pit, they kind of took a sigh of relief. And I think that goes back in time. If you remember 2021 or even last year in Mexico with Lando too, like Max Verstappen is not a guy that you want to be overtaking in the middle of a title fight in the closing races of a season because we know that he's volatile to do anything. He will defend as if his life depends on it. He will exploit all the gray areas possible. So I really think that, Red Bull thought that they were giving him a chance to attack, but maybe if they could go back in time, they might um, instead want to give him a chance to defend rather than that.
I almost wonder if their major concern was the speed difference in the straight line, towards up from the final turn into turn one. But because that to me, that's the only part of the track that they really would have been able to pass. So, but yeah, you kind of want to see it, right? You have nothing to lose, right? You are so
Yeah,
far behind the championship that you need to take these risks. So that's why I was very interested to see that case. It also is another what if scenarios of what if he didn't get that right tire puncture when the hards, right? Like, could he have, defended in P1 longer or have that kind of scenario build out because of that non-puncture?
there's so many what ifs in this race too. Just even going back to the hard tire thing there, he said that the hard tire wasn't comfortable for him, but then it also makes you wonder, well, like what if he started on the mediums and didn't have that? Let's say that puncture never happens, and he's just up to P13 on. He started on the mediums, and he's on the mediums now, and he can still do a medium soft. Where does that put him? But I think that's maybe shows the growing legend of Max. That we can talk here and talk about all these what ifs, and it's only possible for a driver like him and a few others.
All I gotta say is he saved me in fantasy this weekend, so I appreciate hats off with all the passes. Another notable drive that I wanted to, because we're coming towards the end of this week's episode. It's very short and sweet, but obviously there's a lot of storylines we want to continue to talk about later on next week. But Ollie Behrman, I just want to give another special shout out. Another great race from him, getting P6. I don't know if you guys know this, but this is the four straight races of him getting the points. Singapore ninth, USA, Austin Grand Prix or US Grand Prix ninth, Mexico fourth. Obviously in Sao Paulo or Brazilian Grand Prix, he had a P6 finish. So another remarkable drive, and the Haas's are coming to life a little bit, which it was kind of been really interesting, and especially we'll see how those kind of towards the end of the constructors on some of those teams from 7 to 10, how it's going to end up. But any final last comments to you, Daniel and Andrew? Mindful of time, but I think there's some other notable drives, and unfortunately um, for the hometown hero, he did not have the weekends of weekends, crashing out in the first couple of laps. But I'll turn it over to you guys.
Yeah, it's a shame for Bortoleto that we didn't get to see him perform more at his home Grand Prix. But I mean, I just want to say, like, what an incredible rookie class we have this year. It feels like if you were to split the calendar up into whatever number of pieces you want, like, there's just a rookie shining at every different part. And, right now we have like two. We got Kimi and Behrman, and Behrman has just been killing it. I feel like people aren't even paying they've obviously paid attention to his Sunday performances, but he's just been taking it to Ocon, like even in qualifying all year. And Ocon kind of had this quiet reputation of maybe being like anonymous in some ways, but he's no slouch in qualifying either. And Behrman has just been taking it to him. And so I think if we hopefully maybe on a future episode when we're talking about the future Ferrari, Behrman has put himself right in there. If Ferrari wants an out in the coming years on Lewis, like this guy looks ready. And
It's also a reminder that like he's the one that stepped in for Carlos Sainz, and I think it was it Saudi Arabia where he came
yeah, Jeddah.
P7?
Yeah.
Yeah, he came P7 to when he Carlos had his appendix removed. Andrew, any final last comments to you?
I just want to commend how well both Racing Bull drivers drove this weekend, especially in such a pivotal time for them in the championship when they don't even have their seats solidified for next season. We still got three seats to lock up, one being the second Red Bull seat, and then both Racing Bulls. So to see them perform under that pressure at Interlagos was incredible. Hadger did, had an incredible start. Unfortunately, tapered off towards the end. And then on the flip side, really just disappointing performance from Sonoda, who, had a 10-second penalty for creating a collision, and then he didn't serve that correctly. So he had to reserve that again, which just, put his race out of reach. And, maybe the tinfoil hats have Lewis Hamilton leaving Ferrari, taking that second Red Bull seat next season to kind of,
You
stick it to
lose.
John Elkann. And then maybe both, there's three fighting for two spots next season. Who knows? I don't know. Maybe I'm the only one wearing that tinfoil hat, but that would be quite the scenario to build out.
That's
If I may, I think one more driver that we have to kind of give a shout out to is just like Pierre Gasly. It feels like all the time comes to Brazil, Alpine is just up there, and I think it's the first time in like 8 weekends or something that Gasly or Alpine has scored
3 months,
points. But
he said he had. I think it's Spa when they had their last points. So 3 months and they
crazy.
haven't had
But
points. And he scored on both the sprint and the race. So that was,
yeah.
yeah, well deserved for Pierre Gasly.
Every time we come to Interlagos, that's it. Put Gasly in your fantasy team.
that,
There it
that's
is.
that's a
Gasly and Max.
That's a smart play. Just ending off this week's episode, Daniel, very appreciate, as always, you coming on. We'll make sure we put your social media links into the episode below. And also, just a reminder, the championship standings as it is, Lando Norris 390, Oscar Piastri 366, Max Verstappen 341. Constructors, McLaren at 756, Mercedes 398, Red Bull Racing or the Max Verstappen car 366, Ferrari 362. And time will tell. Tune in next week as we'll preview the Las Vegas Grand Prix. And stay tuned to our social media channels on the next race watch at Garden Bar Bodega. And as always, this is Ricci, that is Andrew, and this is Daniel Valente. And thank you all for tuning into this week's episode. And have a great day, everyone.